Hello, and welcome to a new Laker Lessons series, Research in Action, a series where we look at what the research says about a whole bunch of different topics, but break it down into a short lesson that you can watch maybe on your lunch break or at night while you're making dinner. You're a busy practitioner, so it's hard to study all the research. That's why we made these Research in Actions, so you don't have to. I'm Vanessa Kiesler, and I'm working with the Grand Valley Charter Schools office to bring you this information. And today we are going to be focusing on professional learning and instructional coaching. So before we get into the actual research, there's three things I want you to remember about research. One, there's good research, and then there's junk research. Two, a great deal of research only shows associations, not cause and effect. And three, research is science, so it's always evolving. Well, let's break those things down. Good versus junk research. So you have probably gone online and looked up the research on something, or you've probably heard a leader or a colleague or something say, well, the research shows this. Unfortunately, not everything that everybody calls research is actually high quality. Some of it's not very good. Some of it's done improperly, not using the right methods. I'll give you a hint. If you watch these Research into Action briefs, you are getting good research. You're getting research from peer-reviewed places. You're getting research that follows the right methods. That's why we wanted to make them so that you didn't have to worry about, is this good research? Is it bad research? It does the work for you. But if you're out there on your own and you're looking and you want to know if research is good or bad, here's a couple quick things to look for. You do want research from what's called peer-reviewed journals. So those are journals where other scientists, other researchers read the study and give feedback to the author. Authors go through multiple rounds of review for peer-reviewed journals. So when it's published, it's not only one person saying, well, this is a finding. It's a community of scientists, educators agreeing on the study and its merits. You want research that's published by a third party. So sometimes a think tank or an organization will put out their own research. They've done their own study of their own data and they find something. And while there's benefit to that, because sometimes organizations have data and they put it out there, it's not usually very independent. There's a motivation to say what you want it to say when you do your own study of your own product or your own practice. And then the third thing to look for is they should be telling you how they did the research. And if you're not somebody who spends all your spare time reading research methodology, that might not be something you know a lot about, and that's okay. But if a study doesn't tell you where the data came from or what they did to calculate it or what their assumptions were, it might not be a very good study. On the converse, you want to avoid that self-published research by advocacy organizations. Those types of briefs or pieces can be good for understanding the position of an organization, but they're not necessarily the most rigorous or the most independent, again, to think about it that way. And especially if it's a for-profit company, like a testing company or a company that sells professional learning, and they say, our research shows that our professional learning is the best in the business, you might want to be a little bit cautious about that. And then this is the thing I always like to tell people, just because there's a picture of a child who's learning happily or just because the graphics look good doesn't mean the research is good. There's a lot of excellent research published in boring looking formats. But again, you're lucky, you can just watch these and take a shortcut to the good research. And the Grand Valley Charter Schools office does research, works with partners for research, and compiles research and makes it available to all of you. So you can visit gvsu.edu/CSO/research, and you can find information from the Grand Valley Charter School office and studies that they've done with different partners. The second thing to think about with research is associations versus cause and effect. So I bring this up because the most common question in education is often, well, what works? How do we know it's going to work? We want to know if we do this thing, it's going to work. And there are a lot of people who are willing to say, well, the research shows that this works. However, when you get into the statistics behind it, some methods tell you when one thing happens, another thing changes. Those are associations or correlations. And they might be related, but they might also be unrelated. And you can say, what we noticed is when we implemented this professional learning program, our teacher engagement and reports of excitement about teaching went up. And you can think, maybe those two things are related, but if you haven't done methods that allow you to say, the professional learning program caused those increases in engagement, you don't actually know for sure that it was the professional learning program. Maybe at the same time, the school rolled out a Tuesday morning late start where teachers come in a couple hours later and have time to do planning on their own in the morning or do errands. And that actually made them happier about teaching. In education, both correlational or association methods and causal methods are used, and that's all part of building the science of education. But you do want to be sure you understand, are you saying these two things are related, or are you saying the study was set up to show that this caused this? And then that leads to my last point that I want you to keep in mind. Research is science, and that means that when you do one study and you have a hypothesis and you test it, you get some evidence, either in support of the hypothesis or against the hypothesis. But then people do another study. They try again. They look a different way. They test a different idea. I think education definitely has this struggle where the new leader comes in and says, I read the research. This is going to work. We're going to do it. And everybody races off to do the new thing. And then it doesn't work the way that people wanted for a lot of reasons. Implementation, not enough time and money. It wasn't the right solution. And I think it's easy for us as educators to start to get jaded and say, well, research is, it's always wrong, it's always changing, why bother looking? I just want to encourage us to keep going back to the research, keep updating what we're learning, and keep tuning into Laker Lessons where you can hear the most recent research. You'll note in today's lesson, there's mostly research from the last 2 to 4 years. This is very recent research, and you can hear what the latest discoveries in the field are. What does research tell us about professional learning? So here's what we're going to learn today. Going to learn what research says about 3 questions. Does professional learning work, or is it just a big waste of time and money? What are some key characteristics of effective professional learning? And is instructional coaching an important part of professional learning, and why and how? I want to point out there is an organization called the Research Partnership for Professional Learning. Their acronym is RIPPLE, and I used a lot of resources from them. They are an excellent place for you to go for, again, up-to-date research and briefs that are written for policymakers and practitioners, not necessarily for other researchers. The big question on everybody's mind, is professional learning a waste of time and money? And I know some teachers have said that before. The answer is actually from research, no. Based on these high-quality studies, there is evidence that teachers can improve their classroom practices in meaningful ways from professional learning. They can improve both their content knowledge and their pedagogical content knowledge, how they deliver the content, their skills in content delivery, their skills in teaching in general. And professional learning can help support teachers at all levels of their career. So while it's generally more impactful for teachers earlier in their career, in this study, cited here, the Pepe, Taylor, Tyler, and Lasky, teachers at all stages showed improvements in their teaching practice based on professional learning. But you're probably thinking, well, I went to this one professional learning one time, it was big, waste of my time and money. And it's true, there's variation. There are a lot of studies of professional learning that show no effect. What makes it effective? What are some of the key characteristics of effective professional learning? The first thing to note is that the research does suggest that professional learning does not have to be time-intensive or job-embedded necessarily. So for a while, there was a big push toward you have to spend lots of time, you have to be job-embedded. Those things do help, but the quality of the professional learning and some of these other factors that we're going to talk about are actually more important. And the most important thing is that the professional learning that you're giving your teachers, or you're taking as a teacher, or you're taking as a leader, is that it's coherent with the other instructional strategies, your school models, and it needs to relate to the work that teachers are doing. If you take a training or you offer a training that is not aligned with school goals and does not make sense to you as a teacher, or does not make sense to your teaching workforce, it's not going to help improve their practice. It's like teaching somebody to do something that might be helpful in a totally different context, but does not help their day-to-day. So when you are thinking about professional learning programs or initiatives for your school, thinking about the complex and varied district and school environments, and remember, as the quote says here, if the teachers perceive conflicts between the practices promoted by professional learning and other things they're hearing, they won't do the professional learning practices. And I wanted to give a Michigan-specific suggestion to help with this. So as you develop professional learning plans, as you think about what your teachers and leaders are going to be doing, this should align with your continuous improvement goals and the planning you're doing in MICIP, the Michigan Integrated Continuous Improvement Process. This should be part of it. As you set your goals, you understand your needs and set your goals and implement plans, professional learning should be part of addressing those goals. It shouldn't be separate from it. It shouldn't be something else you do. And then as you think about the professional learning you're pursuing to support Michigan becoming a top 10 education state, again, align the professional learning toward those goals. So there's a big debate in the research literature about, should you teach teachers content? Should they have professional learning on content? Should they have it on instructional practices? And this is one of those places where the science has been working toward an answer. Content learning does matter. So does disciplinary content knowledge. So just content, like getting really good at understanding math, does seem to help as a teacher, but also the math that you need to be a teacher, disciplinary content knowledge is important. Over time, the research has started to suggest that when professional learning is focused on changing practice and pedagogy, that's perhaps more important. There seems to be bigger gains to student outcomes when you focus on changing practice as opposed to just learning content or disciplinary content. So the recommendation coming out of the research, and I put 3 citations here because I think this is a big one that you might, because it's been an evolving conversation, I wanted to back it up. Focusing on subject-specific instructional practices over pure content knowledge. So it's still based in subject-specific knowledge, but those instructional practices, what are you going to do tomorrow when you're trying to teach your students math? The research isn't sure why the content knowledge training doesn't translate as much into student outcomes, but there's hypotheses that it's because it's too distant from what you're going to do the next day or the next week. So it's great that you broadened your content knowledge, but tomorrow you need to teach students, and what are some practices you can use for that? Research has also found that professional learning that's focused on helping teachers learn to use new curriculum materials, including practicing doing the curriculum with peers, rehearsing instruction, that's proven effective. Another huge component of effective professional learning is teacher collaboration. So there's research that shows that when teachers collaborate, it improves professional learning outcomes. This collaboration can take a lot of different forms, but the one that is most supported by research is this collaborating for improvement that you see here. So these are peer-to-peer efforts that center directly on improving instruction. So here's some examples, some suggestions. That could be a direct discussion or rehearsal of instructional practices. It could be feedback from peer observations. It could be sharing strategies that engage students and families in their learning. And it can be working together authentically to change instructional practice. So the idea here is when you sit down as colleagues and come up with some sort of instructional practice you're trying to change together, and you work together on an authentic problem. So it's not doing some activity that was dreamt up just for the professional learning, but it's that you're working together with professional learning to improve your practice in a certain way. There's several structures that support collaboration. You would be familiar with all of these, but the research shows that they're all effective in their own way. Formal professional learning communities, teacher teams, informal collegial interactions, and group work. But the most important takeaway is collaborate. Don't put a teacher in a room alone with some professional learning and think that that's the most effective way to support them. And there's just a quote here that I thought really encapsulated this well. Collaboration can have the strongest impact on practice when it embodies joint work around shared and specific goals. For example, working together to adapt collectively curricular materials to meet the needs of students in the school, rather than trading preferred instructional approaches or working vaguely on, quote, improving practice. So in summary, for professional learning, it is a good use of your time and money. If you're a teacher, it's a good use of your time. If you're a leader and you're wondering, why are we doing all this PL? It's a good investment. But you want to look for that balance of content-based professional learning and professional learning that changes practice. Creating time for authentic teacher collaboration is really important. I know that's hard in the structure of a school day, but it's a worthwhile investment to do that. And then, again, I cannot emphasize this enough, making sure that the professional learning is aligned with broader school and district goals. This helps create coherence, and it helps teachers and leaders feel like it's not just another thing they have to do that's disconnected from the actual day-to-day work of educators. There's one more piece of professional learning that we are going to cover today. This is the third question, and that is instructional coaching. So you've probably all experienced instructional coaching. Maybe you've been an instructional coach or you've heard it talked about. So why is instructional coaching actually a positive professional learning practice? The research is really clear that instructional coaching has large positive effects on teachers' instructional practice and student achievement. And this citation here is what's called a meta-analysis, which this author looked at 60 different studies of instructional coaching and looked at their methods, and there's some statistics you do around meta-analyses. So this study, when it says there's large positive effects, that means we looked at really high quality causal research and we see large positive effects. So this is a very strong finding. The other reason for instructional coaching, another one, is having a content-focused coach reduce turnover in novice teachers. And we know that keeping teachers in the profession and helping them feel supported is a really high priority for everyone who's in education. So a couple quick tips. Who should be doing the coaching? And some of this might sound to you like, well, duh, everybody knows this. And sometimes that's how research is. It just validates what you already knew. So here's who should coach. Someone who is strong at teaching practices. So you don't want someone saying, here's how to teach if they themselves are not a good teacher. Someone who's strong at relationship building. Coaches have to be able to form positive working relationships with those that they are coaching. And so that's a critical component. And then they need to be credible, which is a little bit harder to define, but the teacher or the leader, whoever's receiving the coaching, needs to perceive the person as a credible source of authority. Who should not coach? The most important thing is the person who is evaluating the coachee should not be the coach. Those are two different functions, evaluation and coaching. Who should be coached? So research shows that teachers early in their career benefit more from coaching, although it is beneficial to teachers throughout their career. But coaching, if you had limited coaching resources, you would be smart to focus them on teachers earlier in their career. This second one's really important, teachers who are willing and interested. So sometimes there's initiatives where everybody's going to get a coach whether they want a coach or not. And the research suggests that's not as effective. If people want to be coached and are willing to accept that coaching, that's going to be more productive for the outcome. And that teacher openness to being coached is facilitated by a general school culture where continuous improvement is modeled, where we're all getting better all the time, and where there's good and strong relational trust, where people feel like the coaching is being offered in a setting meant to improve individual practice and really keep everybody moving toward shared goals around student outcomes. There's always some people who are really like, I don't really want to be coached. I'm not interested, not going to do it. And we know that that won't be very effective for them to coach them anyway. So one suggestion from the research is to, for those individuals, engage in whole group professional development or peer evaluation, where peers would evaluate some practice, give some feedback, probably anonymized, rather than putting them in a coaching situation. What should coaches do? They should plan, they should observe and give feedback. Those are like the core coaching activities. They show up throughout the coaching literature. Content-focused coaching as opposed to more general coaching. So I think this again aligns with what we saw from professional learning, that getting coaching around your instructional practices, what you're doing to teach math in this classroom, helps more than in general teaching, you should do this. So giving that content-focused and specific feedback. Like with professional learning, the instructional coaching literature suggests focusing on quality over quantity, but do have a planned frequency. So if it's every 3 weeks, it's every 3 weeks, but have a plan in place to do it. You know, in this era of work from home still and distance, virtual coaching can be effective and it can minimize challenges with resource or distance. So again, this is something the research studied and has come to the conclusion that it doesn't have to be in-person, face-to-face to be effective. What's needed for coaching to be successful? Time. There need to be time for coaches to coach, and there needs to be time for coachees to be coached. And we know time is a scarce resource in schools often, but again, when you're thinking about how to allocate your time, putting time toward coaching is a good way to use your time. Instructional coaches also need their own training and professional learning, both on how to coach and the content they're coaching. So you have to train the coaches just as much as you have to train teachers or leaders. And instructional coaches need that role to be protected. So if they're an instructional coach and there's time each day that they're supposed to do that, making sure as a school leader that that person doesn't get pulled away to do recess duty or some other thing, that they don't get treated like a substitute or whatnot. And again, I say that knowing that schools are working really hard to staff to meet the needs of students, but if you want your instructional coaching program to be effective, you have to make sure your instructional coaches are instructional coaches. And then you need leadership buy-in and training. Leaders need to know why coaching works, and they need to know how it's going to be happening, and they need training in how to support the coaching. And then you see collaboration coming back here. There's a couple themes throughout, and here is collaboration. Coaches need opportunities to collaborate, and they need to be able to access coaching expertise. There's a couple considerations. You know, a lot of studies of instructional coaching find that the bigger it gets, the harder it is to see the impacts. So taking teacher coaching to scale is hard, going from it's working well in this school to we're going to do it for the whole ISD or the whole state. That can be a challenge. In general, the research seems to suggest that when programs have fewer than 100 teachers, there's better results. So for some of you, that might not apply. You probably aren't thinking of unveiling a coaching program that goes further than 100 teachers. But if you are thinking, if you're someone who's watching this and you're thinking about coaching across a portfolio of schools or as a large initiative, maybe think about smaller coaching initiatives that can run more strategically as opposed to getting it to everybody all at once. And then coherence matters in instructional coaching too. Again, if we want to make differences in schools in student outcomes, both academic and non-academic, there has to be a plan, and all of the activities need to work toward the plan and not just feel like, do this, do this, do this. The coaching has to be in alignment with the overall goals of the school and district. And then I'm not going to read this whole chart, but I will highlight a couple things. So what should you do and not do with coaching? And this is taken directly from this excellent brief that the Research Partnership for Professional Learning produced called Improved Teacher Practice with Instructional Coaching. You should create coach hiring processes that consider teaching and coaching ability. You should not hire experienced and expert teachers without thinking about whether or not they can coach other teachers. You should protect coaches' time to work with teachers. And I already mentioned this, you should not make coaches the default substitute teacher or the administrative worker. You should structure coaching to allow coaches to build a relationship with their teachers. And you should not overload coaches with too many teachers or make coaches responsible for those formal evaluations. You should determine and broadly communicate essential elements of the coach design program. You should not grow or scale those coaching programs without thinking about implementation barriers and what that's going to look like. And then you should build the coach programs into a broader system of instructional supports, that coherence, including your curriculum, your standards, your assessment practices, and your other professional development. And you should not rely on coaching alone as the sole strategy to promote high quality instruction. A couple key tips to think about with instructional coaching. Don't give up on it. If you've tried it before and you weren't happy with the results, maybe think about some of these best practices and try again. Keep that focus on coherence and aligning what teachers and leaders need to know and do as part of a meaningful whole system plan and how coaching can support that. And then give your coaches adequate training and coaching and adequate time to coach. Thank you for watching this Laker lesson. If you wanted to follow up on any of the citations or the resources that were referenced during the presentation, there's a works cited page posted along with this Laker lessons so you can dig in and read for yourself if you like. We appreciate your time today.